Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 Podcast. We're a podcast that talks about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into it all from infrastructure, growth, business, politics, culture. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it as we navigate how to change and grow this lovely city. Hopefully everyone had a wonderful holidays. Ann, how was your holiday week?
It was actually pretty good. I think that the weather has been good. So, this minute of fall that we get makes being outside in Fort Worth tolerable and even pleasant. I had a couple of nights where I was like, we need to find a patio.
Yeah, and so we got to think about this too. So we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses. But guys, this week, I'm looking at 15 articles on my tab. So we just got a ton to get to. But I also want to give us some time to have a Thanksgiving special where we talk about being thankful on the pod. So I have 3 questions here for you, Ann, and myself. I was thinking of, what are you thankful for that the holidays reminded you about?
Well, I think the first thing is that we weren't planning to be with any family on Thanksgiving, so that was making me a little bit sad. And I had 2 things that popped up that kind of helped me overcome that sadness, and that was that I got a really sweet text from my youngest child the morning of Thanksgiving saying that they were thankful for the support that they've received from us as a family. And then we got a sweet invitation from a friend to spend Thanksgiving with them and some other folks that were, family and friends. So we ended up not being alone, which was great. And we ended up having a really nice time and being with some people that we don't see regularly, but it was a really great gathering.
So what is something in that gathering that you are thankful for having that experience, or it reminded you of something, or it made you appreciative of something? Was there a moment or a conversation that you're like, you know what, I'm appreciative of this moment? Because Thanksgiving brings people together, from all walks of life. I think that's something I appreciated. It's what I'm thankful for of holidays. It's it gets you out of your bubble of seeing the same people.
Yeah, we definitely spent time with people that we don't see on the regular. And it reminded me of friends that I don't see as often as I would like to.
Yeah.
I didn't really have the experience of being with people where you had to be careful about what you talk about and all the things that they say not to bring up at a family holiday where you might be with people who don't agree. Because we were mainly with like-minded people, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it definitely reminded me that I need to get off of my phone and start making a more concerted effort to see some of these people that mean a lot to me face to face in the community, not just around the holidays. So I think that was a good reminder, because these were great people that I don't see super regularly. I've seen several of them recently because we were all celebrating the life of someone that we all loved that passed recently. But it definitely just reminded me of needing to make a more concerted effort to get with people that bring me joy.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I have stepbrothers, stepsisters, step-parents. There's always between 6 to 12 people at a holiday thing that are just people I see only Thanksgiving and Christmas. But it's just a run of a group of people, from highly educated to blue-collar jobs to tons of kids to no kids to tons of dogs. And to see all these people come together and just, wow, you just see how they think or how they operate their lives or the things they complain about. This kind of full circles to the purpose of this pod in this episode. One of my people I got to hang out with that I rarely get to see is my cousin who lives in San Antonio. She lives in the San Antonio Sprawl, and all she complained about was the traffic of living out there, and just hearing about that to other, it just shows that when Thanksgiving brings people together who lives, different lives that you get to appreciate or respect or hear their concerns that you wouldn't have outside of reading the newspaper or listening to a podcast.
And we had a serious dog theme going on at our Thanksgiving as well. We were with friends that have multiple dogs, and I love dogs. I don't dislike them, but I'm not a super dog person. But there were some cute dogs at our Thanksgiving, and our kids love dogs, and we couldn't have them when they were growing up because my husband has allergies. So I was sending them all these cute dog
Yeah,
pictures
yeah.
to our family group text, and everybody was oohing and awing over the cute puppies.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I say I'd be thankful for is everyone who listens to the 817 podcasts. I mean, the 817 podcasts, I don't think it grows at the rate that it grew when we first started. We're 3 years in, but it's still a healthy, solid group of people who I can tell really look forward to listening to this every Monday or every week. And, I think about our podcast, and I'm a consumer of tons of information and content. And what I always appreciate that I think we do on this pod is we're not trying to appease anyone, and I don't think we're trying to create an echo chamber. And so the tough thing about our pod is, like, I'm sure if you listen to this pod, we either said something you disagree with, we could have pissed you off, but we also supported some of your thinking. And I want, every listener to know that, like, if you're showing up, and if EJ and Ann makes you feel uncomfortable, or, sometimes you wonder where they're going, I just appreciate you allowing our perspectives and us navigating our realities to be a part of your knowledge stack as you think through your own perspective on how to figure out the world. So I'm thankful. We're thankful for all of you for participating in this. So let's go ahead and dive into the show. All right. So short story number 1 is TCU increases tuition past $60K. This is after a $1 billion fundraising campaign, and the cost now tops Harvard. This is a Star Telegram article by Harrison Mantis. TCU students and parents are raising alarms after the university announced a 7.9% increase in undergraduate tuition for the 2024 school year. It is the largest percentage increase, at least since 2011. It's roughly 10,000, up roughly 10,000 since the 2021 school year. And Harvard University's tuition is $54,000.
Well, not to mention that the $61,643 for tuition is before fees, books, and room and board.
Wow. And this is all after the $1 billion fundraising campaign in October. So they have, and that allowed them to spend over $20 million on more than 20 new buildings since 2012. And here's like the crazy perspective here when you look at it. When you look at inflation increase to the increase of tuition, that salaries and wages has increased 14% since 2014 for faculty and staff. But yet the university's undergraduate enrollment has increased 33%. So that is crazy to just look at, like, the rise of the cost of schools going so much, and it's not even going to the professors or the staff, because their wages have only increased 14%. Anyways, short article, but an article that just really kind of hits. TCU is obviously taking advantage of. They got it to the national title. There's maybe see themselves as a larger player. I don't know if the opening of Texas A&M downtown, I don't know what the motivation is, but as someone who lives close to TCU, what is your overall take?
So, there's always been concerns about the growth of the university, students living off campus. I know that some of those new buildings have been dorms and housing for students on campus. But I do think it's a bit of a hard sell, and it just may be that they have such a demand for their enrollment that they believe they can capture folks that would pay this amount of tuition. But the concerning part that I had was talking about folks that are there on scholarship, and some of those scholarships are fixed scholarships that are not going to increase. And so if you're in the middle of 4 years of school, that's going to be a huge problem for you to be able to maintain, and finish up your school. I think that surrounding neighborhoods are always in favor of more housing on campus or building housing on property that the university owns. I think that there's some plans to do some improvements to properties that TCU owns along Berry Street. And I think that will all be beneficial to the culture in the area of the university. So hopefully some of that $1 billion amount that they've already raised is going to go to alleviating some of the problems with the scholarships that people will have, and providing on-campus housing and other things that will benefit the students that go there. For years, they said that they were not planning to increase the student body population, that they wanted to have kind of that more curated student body where they could provide a level of education and a level of services to their students and not just grow for the sake of growth, which leads us into the
Yeah.
later stories about growth in Fort Worth overall.
I mean, I think my overall, knock of the price tuition is I think it worked for TCU. It's kind of like Fort Worth as a whole. Fort Worth, and I think what we're going to learn about the big story is just like there's places that feel like busy and booming, and then there's places that feels like desolate and isolated. And TCU is one of those places that, like you said, supply and demand allows them to pull something like this off. But what you have to also be aware of is that this is happening at a time where college tuition falls for the first time in decades. College tuition is rising at a slower rate than inflation for the first time in over 30 years. Recently published data by College Board show that between 2021 and 2021-22, tuition rates increased 1.6% at public four-year colleges and 2.1% at private nonprofit schools. Since inflation during that period was 5.3%, college tuition has fallen in real time. And it kind of states that with the pandemic, you have less kids going to enrolling in the bachelor degrees program. Enrollment in bachelor degrees program dropped 3.2% between 2019 and 2021. The decline is much larger for students at less selective colleges and those pursuing two-year degrees. So at the end of the day, the demand of college is slowing as a whole, and that also deals with, like, I think the pandemic and a lot of kids missing the opportunity to college, but then also the pandemic waking up people with really finances and jobs and kids needing to take a more affordable approach. So what this ultimately does, it continues to make TCU an elite bubble place that is really only for the kids whose parents will pay for it. And the parents who are conservative in Texas, they have really 4 schools that they send their kids to. Texas A&M is the conservative capital higher ed institution of the country. Then you got TCU, you got Texas Tech, you got Baylor. They won't send their kids to the University of Texas because it's a liberal place in Austin, Texas. So it's fitting a niche that allows them to do this. But at the end of the day, it's happening at a time where everywhere else supply and demand for college is down, and people are being more thoughtful in how they invest their time in their tuition and how they'll pay that.
Yeah. My kids didn't even consider TCU. It's right in our backyard, but I told them they'd have to live at home if they wanted to go to TCU, and they were ready to leave the nest. So that was not an option for them.
So we'll keep on track. Well, now we're going to move into another topic here, and that is Arlington, Texas, and a article from the Dallas Morning News. I'll kind of bring us in, but you kind of know this topic, of course, because we're talking about transportation. But basically, this is by Haley Samsel, a Fort Worth Report article, a journalist who's just really been rocking and keeping environment and transportation at the forefront of viewers and people seeking knowledge here in Fort Worth. But basically, our article says, with a population of 395,000, Arlington remains the largest U.S. city without a mass public transportation system, including bus or rail. Voters have rejected proposals to create public transit 3 times since 1980, with many residents opposing a bus system between 2013 and 2017. The city funded a single bus route operated by Dallas Area Rapid Transit and cited low ridership. At the end of the day, I think I'm going to let you kind of talk us through this. You have the World Cup coming in 2026, the 2024 MLB All-Stars. To me, Arlington is an entire event, large group space city. It's there. Its economic viability is tourism. It seems like the number one place that should be all in for large mass transit investment. What is your take on this article, and what do you see needs to happen?
Well, I mean, it's something that has come up over and over and over again, and that, they haven't had a vote more recently. And I know that there are some folks on the Arlington City Council that have been more open-minded to the prospect of possibly having some public transportation. So I think they should revisit this because the fact that they had that single bus route, basically it was just serving UTA from the TRE station. And then they took that away because they said it had low ridership. And then they switched over to Via, which is the on-demand service. And that's also funded through the COG and RTC. And so that bus route, I did some diving into some old articles to see like what that funding situation looked like before and what the arguments were for removing it back when they took that bus away. And all of those things are going to come up for Via as well, because it's subsidized and doesn't move that many people and gets mired down in congestion. So I don't think it's a long-term solution. And I think that a lot of cities that don't have robust multimodal transit are looking for technological fixes, and they think that self-driving cars and flying cars and technology is going to be the fix. And I just think that they're going to spin their wheels and come back around to the tried and true public transportation things that work. And my hope would be that Arlington at some point would come to that conclusion.
But it doesn't seem like Arlington is so behind the 8 ball on this. When it comes to, it seems like the perfect place to be all on. I mean, the amount of traffic as someone who lives on the east side that I-30 brings when any type of thing happens in Arlington. I mean,
it's even when things are not happening in Arlington. There's always a slowdown when you go through Arlington, and there's a ton of lanes through there. Yeah. You wouldn't think that would be the case. But literally, I always anticipate a slowdown going through Arlington regardless of the time of day. And it typically always happens. So my husband and I went over to Dallas Monday night to meet some friends for dinner. And it took us over an hour on 30 at 6 o'clock at night. Yeah. And I was really surprised by that. We used to talk about how close Dallas and Fort Worth are and how easy it is to get between the two, but I don't think that's the case anymore, which is why I think the second article that we're talking about when it comes to this transportation question, and that's a Dallas Morning News piece about high-speed rail. Should Dallas to Fort Worth be Texas's first route? And we touched on this previously with another article. I think it was a Star Telegram article that visited this, but this is an opinion piece in the Dallas Morning News asking, should we be talking about North Texas Council of Governments' early stage high-speed rail project between Dallas and Fort Worth. As congestion and accidents plague our roadways, innovative transportation solutions are key to sustaining our region's rapid growth. Though it seems a utopian in Texas, high-speed rail could be a huge boon for the state if implemented strategically. So they go on to say that if we don't do the high-speed rail connective triangle throughout the entire state, that if we just tried to do this little piece between Dallas and Fort Worth, that would be a very expensive, silly thing to do. And I absolutely think that it should be part of a larger network. I don't think we should be putting the amount of money it would cost to put high-speed rail between these two cities that are this as close together as they are, if it's not connecting. But they speak to the fact that it connects to a one-seat ride that you could get from Houston to Dallas to Fort Worth, all one-seat ride, if this is done properly. And I think that could benefit Arlington. So getting back to this question about Arlington, that entertainment district that they have is right there on the I-30 corridor. And this study looked at 47 routes, I think, because they wanted to make sure that they looked at every single configuration, that if anybody showing up at a public meeting came in and said, well, did you think about this or did you look at that? They could say, yes, look at this map. And if you look at the maps, it's like spaghetti. They literally looked at every single route that they could possibly do this connection between Dallas and Fort Worth. And Arlington would benefit greatly from this if this were to go into place.
Oh, yeah. They have a stop right at the Arlington Entertainment District. Yeah. Like, that seems perfect. If you're going to Six Flags, Hurricane Harbor, Globe Life Field, whatever, the Star, AT&T Stadium, I mean, there's just so much going on all the time.
I said 47 alignments. They studied 43 alignments. So not quite 47, but still, that's a lot.
And, I think the overall basis, I don't know what the title is currently going to be of this pod, but it's going to be somewhere around the consequences of Fort Worth suburban sprawl. And I think the tough thing about getting high-speed rail and transit successfully excited in the Metroplex and Arlington is that everyone lives in the burbs. So like they still would have to drive to take benefits of the high rail, that the location that will be at Lancaster TMP station, or wherever it's going to be, when the majority of Fort Worthians live in the burbs, they still have to get in their car for a good amount of time to get to a spot to even jump on rail. And I think that's going to, that whole conversation of transportation is like, how do we get people more on board for it?
Yeah, and I think that there are ideas of connecting with public transportation to some of the more suburban areas. It can't connect all of them, and it's not going to be a door-to-door service. But, these are the trade-offs of living in these locations that not everybody takes into consideration. And I just like everything that I do we recommend doing for the core of the city isn't going to be beneficial to the suburbs, and everything that we recommend happening in the suburbs is not going to be beneficial to the core. But I think there just needs to be a lot more willingness to support things that are the greater good, that will support a large group of people, regardless if it's you individually.
Yep. No, so again, this High Rail opinion article, though, was great. Had a lot of great graphs. You click on it around what the opportunities could look like on what direction.
And I'm not sure what kind of public output they're doing in Dallas, but we've had multiple public meetings in Fort Worth, on the Fort Worth side, to bring people up to speed on all of this. There was one little line in here that talked about how, things haven't been maybe talked about publicly, or it's been a quiet. And if that's the case, I think we need to get the word out, because I think that more people would be interested in having these conversations. They go into a lot of detail about the alignment in Dallas.
Yeah, they got a bunch of detail. The train would reach top speed 180 miles an hour and a stop at underground stations in downtown Fort Worth and Arlington's Entertainment District, according to the selected route. The Dallas train will have about 75 feet above the ground through West Dallas, with a station in the Cedars, just south of downtown. Around 90% of the route goes through publicly owned land, Michael Morris, Director of Transportation for NCTCOG, told us.
They did speak about the fact that some of that privately owned land is owned by some very influential people, and there's definitely some folks that would benefit from the route that they're talking about due to land that they own. I was really pleased with the tenor of this article, where it's basically saying, we need to have these conversations, and it didn't seem so much like people digging in their heels. It sounded more like even residents that were interviewed for this article were saying, we'd like to continue to have conversations to try to figure out what could be in the best interests of everybody. And so I think that is what I point to when I say how important it is to have these conversations and not just dig heels in and assume that you need to fight something. So I was pleased with that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And again, what's cool about the 817 pod at this point, being around for 3 years, we've hit every topic probably under the sun. So we constantly will just update you when new articles and new data shows up about things we've talked about, such as rail through the Metroplex and the Texas Triangle, where like 68% of the population of Texas actually lives. So,
and knowing friends that traveled in the state of Texas for the holiday weekend and, had to drive to Houston, I can't imagine how amazing it would be to be able to get on a train and just relax and not have to go through security at an airport for a 1 hour flight, or not even an hour. It's not even an hour. Yeah. The idea of, and then the connections that Amtrak is possibly doing with high-speed rail. I just think that this is a bigger picture that we need to start putting the smaller pieces together on and moving forward with them, instead of just continuing to plan and then beat down ideas and not move forward. And I just think that just gets us more mired down in congestion.
Yeah. Well, it seems like something we will continue to talk about, as it's a hot topic for all of us on the 817 pod. We're now going to move into the third short story, which is about the Fort Worth ISD schools could be among the first considered for closures by Jacob Sanchez in Fort Worth Report. This is an incredible article, and honestly, several of the journalists must have had more time over the holiday, because they just rocked these articles this week. So Jacob did a full comprehensive understanding of the Fort Worth ISD school board meeting in September, discussing what does the district need to do and what are the schools that are under 70% full. The Fort Worth Report analysis found that 48 schools are less than 70% full. and most of those are South and East Fort Worth ISD. The 4 dozen schools are likely to be among the first the district leaders look at to determine how to shrink Fort Worth ISD footprint because of the declining enrollment. It is expected that 1/3 of Fort Worth ISD schools are under enrolled. And you've heard our superintendent, Angelica Ramsey, share that, we're probably going to plateau at 55,000 students, which really just kind of it transforms what our campuses need to look like. But hey, I'm going to stop there and kind of pass the baton to Ann, because I know you took notes on this article and have a lot to say.
Yeah, I did. I thought this was a pretty comprehensive article, and I wasn't sure. It is a Fort Worth report analysis, and I think Fort Worth ISD is just starting to look at some of these things and talk about it. That meeting in September just kind of touched the surface of this is the direction that we're going to be going, and we're going to need to start looking at these things. But they haven't come up with a specific number of campuses to target thus far, and that they're saying that the Fort Worth report analysis is in the ballpark, but that the district has communicated with the public that it is in the early stages of its master facility plan, emphasizing no recommendation or decision has been made yet. So they're just in these early stages. So I when I was looking at this and I was saying, well, what are they measuring for capacity? That was one of my first questions. Is that capacity based on best practices for how kids learn? So I would want to make sure that if we're measuring capacity, we're measuring that based on what's the best practices for children to learn. I also looked at the fact that they are looking at consolidating, and in my opinion, neighborhood schools that you can get to in a variety of ways. I mean, there were times when we did the blue zones, walking and biking school buses. Those neighborhood schools are, I think, really excellent. And many of the neighborhood schools have done a great job and are supported by the neighborhoods in which they're located in. But if we're going to be consolidating and building bigger schools, what I see that coming out to be are those campuses that have massive drive-through drop-off lanes that, snake around the campus, and then large parking lots and located along major arterials. And that's close proximity to lots of cars driving, and it's kind of the opposite of how I think it would ideally be if we had more neighborhood schools, but it seems like that's kind of what they're moving towards.
Some other things, yeah, right. So, I mean, Fort Worth ISD, it's honestly one of the saddest national examples of public ISDs just losing enrollment at a high rate. 1 in 5 students have left the district since 2016. Enrollment is a little over 70,000 students. In 2016, that number was 87,000 students. It's a $45 million deficit. $123 million, that's how much Fort Worth ISD has lost in state revenue since 2019. And let's just get you this perspective here on the situation that we're in. Fort Worth ISD has 140 campuses. To give you perspective, we gave you the population of Fort Worth ISD with a little over 70,000 students. What you have to look here is when you look at other similar ISDs, like Frisco ISD, they have 67,000 students, and they have 77 campuses. So, there are 4,000 less kids than us and nearly half the amount of campuses. You look at Conroe, has 68 campuses for 70,000 students. Conroe is a suburb, 40 minutes from Houston. Cypress Fairbanks has 91 campuses with 118,000 students. So we're definitely dealing with a situation here. What you're seeing also is that the majority of these schools under 70% capacity, it's elementary, which you kind of gave points of why elementary, but then they bring them back high school. What was your kind of take there?
I think middle school, it's anecdotal. It's not based on that I've gone and done a study, but I know in watching people that I know who have made decisions about schooling for their kids, there are some people who have left Fort Worth ISD for middle school and then come back in high school. So I would assume that they're delving into all of this and that they are tracking these things so that it's not just an assumption that if the numbers go down in elementary school and middle school that they're going to continue to stay down in high school.
Yeah.
I would assume that there's experts at the table that know more than I know.
Yeah.
But that was just something that popped into my mind when I read that piece about the fact that some of those numbers go down in elementary and middle, and that they assume that that will lead into lower numbers in high school. And I'm not sure if that's the case. I mean, it seems to me that some of the things that they're planning to do with the consolidating and building bigger campuses is kind of just following that suburban sprawl way of growing.
100%.
And I think that it could lead to the urban core continuing to not have the attention it needs. I understand from those numbers that you just talked about, where the number of students served and the number of campuses, that Fort Worth ISD seems to be way out of whack with that. I think when you start talking about removing campuses, there's a lot of emotion that people have. There's parents who have purchased homes based on the school that they thought their kid would go to. But there's right sizing that has to occur in order to continue to deliver the best product possible. And I think this is another situation where if people come into it hot with their emotions high, you're not going to have, thoughtful conversations that lead to the best results. It's going to end up with people digging in their heels and fighting each other. And even with just some adjustments of attendance zones that they had in the last few years, I saw some of that happening.
Yeah.
So it's that whole resistance to change. This is the way it always has been. My older child went to this school and we want our younger child to have the same experience. I think the building of the new campus to alleviate the overcrowding at Tanglewood, I think that people now realize that second school that they built is a really amazing and beautiful new facility. And so some people see these older buildings and the new, and that's a reason to support the right sizing and the building of new and the consolidating. But then some of these campuses are in amazing, beautiful, historic buildings that we don't build schools like that anymore. And I would hate to see that go.
Yeah.
And if it is going to go, the idea of adaptively reusing these buildings to be something else that is beneficial and additive and positive for the community is such an important conversation to have.
No, I think that was well said. I think that's another consequence of the suburban sprawl that Fort Worth has created, and nationally, the real estate, market has created. You have a opposite narrative to the suburban areas who are overcapacitated. You're talking about those parents who sit, an hour in line to drop their kids off because of the traffic just to get to the school. Going back to talking about Thanksgiving, and my cousin who has 3 kids, 15, 13, and 9, she said there's 5 new high schools that have been built since 2017 in Northside, and they're all at capacity. They were the newest school when they got there, their kids, and now they're graduating with 1,000 students a grade. There's busting at the seams in San Antonio. And so they're busting at the seams. And so, but that same thing is happening in our areas as well, in our suburban areas, is where the capacity, and you can even see that in our elementary schools that are on the kind of the fringe of the loop that still qualify as Fort Worth ISD, but they're also still over capacity. But it's that urban core. And honestly, I said this in a pod before, I actually think rather than our superintendent just saying, oh, we're going down to 55,000 and that's what we need to prepare for, I think that's fair for her leadership and her role of probably being there for the next 5 to 7 years. But if Fort Worth ISD had a visionary kind of superintendent, or even public education as a whole did, I think this can change over 20 years, because I think the consequences of the suburban sprawl will be met. Gen Z will now be looking for homes, so it's not just millennials who are looking to stay in the urban core. I think eventually older people who have these urban areas in the city are starting to sell, would have to start selling. So I think the idea that Fort Worth ISD can't come back to be a Fort Worth, juggernaut of a public school is probably just not enough ambition and aspirations from the visionary leadership we need to have in Fort Worth for decades to come. I think they're right for the next 10 years, but as you see with migration patterns of people, this is going to, eventually people are going to get tired and they're going to value public schools or being around diverse thinking. They're going to want to be in the urban core. And as the younger kids grow up, they're going to continue to see, I didn't like living in the burbs way out there. That's what I dreaded, being in the car all the time or whatever lifestyle. And they're going to want that more as the population gets more diverse, more educated, and more interested in walkability and stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and move into the big story now. So I think a lot of the short stories gave us the crumbs that we needed to create a trail of what's the issue here. We're going to start off with positive news, but then we're going to talk about the consequences of that positive news. The positive news here that Texas has added nearly 1.6 million people between 2020, with Austin's region being the fastest growing metro area with 7.2% growth. We obviously know that, drawing in most new residents. But Fort Worth added the most residents in that time with 48,500. That is more than any other city. And finally, the Dallas-Fort Worth area has surpassed 8 million people in the Metroplex. And the Texas Triangle, which is Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin, holds a whopping 68% of the state's 30.3 million residents. And we've talked about this on and off the show several times, but new data continues to show where the growth is happening. What was your overall take of this and some things you want to highlight?
So there were just those couple of articles, a Fort Worth Business Press article and a Star Telegram article talking about, Dallas-Fort Worth being the fastest growing region and Fort Worth itself being the fastest growing city. And we constantly hear our leadership talking about this as if this is like a rah, 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 we're growing so fast, everyone wants to live here. And I think that that's what some of the articles that we're going to talk about growing out of that is our infrastructure able to keep up with that? Do we have the amenities and the things that keep that being a positive experience? Because growth for growth's sake is not beneficial, and continuing to sprawl is not growth that pays for itself. So I've heard politicians saying over the years, growth pays for growth, but it really doesn't unless you do it in a thoughtful way and unless you have some kind of regulation and management around it so that it is not just spinning off into continued sprawl. So I think that it's important to continue to keep track of this and to see this, but I don't necessarily think that it's the best thing to be like, this is awesome. We're doing a good job. And, it's self-serving to say that planning as an urban planner is the answer to all of this, but it's planning and implementation is the answer to some of this. So some of the unintended consequences that come from growth just for growth, sake, or just riding along with everybody moving here is that affordability continues to be an issue. And so some of the other articles that we had pulled up under this kind of urban sprawl and, growth.
Yeah. Before you move into the housing stuff, there's some core numbers that I saw that I thought were, just perspective. Like with us hitting over 8 million people, we talk about Fort Worth being the 13th largest city. The Metroplex would be the 13th largest state.
Just the Metroplex, bigger than
just the Metroplex
states in the United States.
No, we would be the 13th biggest state, so we're bigger than 30.
Oh, yes, I did my math backwards.
30 plus states. We're bigger than Washington, bigger than Oregon, bigger than Connecticut. We are. That's extremely large. And then the other parts here, as saying what you said about growth doesn't lead to happiness or success. How this growth is looking is interesting. While most Texans live in major metro areas, core cities that are growing rapidly aren't the fastest growing. The fastest growing rates are in these counties around the larger school district, larger cities: Liberty Hill, Western, Caddo Mills, Josephine, Fulshire, where once sleepy outposts now are experiencing large suburban sprawl. So that is also kind of the big kicker here is you're just seeing the overall conversation for all of us for the next decade, regardless if you're an urban planner or someone in this work, is what is going to be the migrant shift of the next generation and the next chapter of the Metroplex, once we all get exhausted of this game of growing outwardly, which then leads to the consequences we talked about with education. We're going to get into the consequences it has with environment, and then we're going to get into the consequences it has with equity and affordable housing. And so, so at the end of the day, like, that's big. And so much that we're seeing that it's that big that there's a Business Insider article that says people are leaving Texas at over rising costs, disenchantment, and politics, which that's a whole nother story we can get into. But we're at a rate where we're losing 500,000 people in Texas every year. I mean, in 2021 and 2022, we lost 494,000 people left us Texas. So we're talking about the growth, but we're also not understanding that we're losing the population of Wyoming every year. And that is because of these rising costs, lack of affordability, but then also the lack of people feeling welcome, infused, and that Texas, they came for the big house and they thought they would be worth it, but now they lost with feeling like they're a part of a community. Something I want to ask you about, Ann, is how, you see those random articles in places like this culturemap.com who's trying to get people, they do a little report and they make something out of it. But it says Fort Worth is the fourth most house-rich city in America. So you're having that, and based off how this happened, I want to make sure. The study found Fort Worth home ownership rate is 44.8%. Fort Worth medium home value is $212,000, which seems low, and the city's medium household income is $927 a year. That means Fort Worth has a 3.13 home value to income ratio, which is the fourth lowest out of all 25 major cities. So you hear something like that, but then you look at the Tarrant housing crisis and homelessness issues that are at the highest levels that it's been in a very long time. How are you navigating people talking, oh, this is still a place for housing affordability and we have a lot of houses, to people dealing with homelessness and evictions?
I mean, I think we have a conundrum in our city that those two things exist together. I know when we were going over the data on the city's website of all of the different districts and the data of renter occupied versus owner occupied, and we were surprised a little bit at some of the high ownership that there was in some of the neighborhoods that are considered like the poorer neighborhoods of the city. So I think this article about the home ownership and being house rich, I think is one that just doesn't really show the true overall struggle that exists in the city. It takes some data and it shows, but it doesn't talk about like the condition of those homes. So people might own homes and may have an income, but the condition of those homes may be in older neighborhoods that are not being able to keep them up and that sort of thing. So I think that it doesn't tell the full story, just kind of like what you were saying. But the other two articles that we were talking about that are kind of unintended consequences to this massive amount of growth and people coming here for jobs that maybe don't pay as much and the prices going up. And then other people coming here with large amounts of cash from homes that they've sold in places where they got a huge amount of money and the prices here are so much lower than what they're used to. They're able to pay more for those, I think leads to this situation where we have more folks that are experiencing homelessness or inability to pay the rents that are existing. So there was a couple of articles. All right. So there's a Fort Worth Report article, Tarrant's Evicted Children and the State's Hidden Homeless Crisis, that basically speaks to a situation where folks that are living in apartments that have mold, forcing them to, get in a situation where the only option they have is to withhold rent, and then they can end up in a dispute with their landlord and can get evicted. And then these folks are out in the community looking for places to live and end up, having to live in their cars. I participated, and I don't know that I spoke about this on the last pod, in a poverty simulation exercise that was put on by Catholic Charities and Tarrant County Homeless Coalition, where we were given a scenario, given a persona to take on, and had to navigate kind of the social services system while trying to maintain, our life and having some unexpected thing come up. And it was excruciating. And I don't think that most people, well, I mean, it's a huge chunk of people that are actually living this every day. But I think those of the people who are in policymaking decision seats are not experiencing this every day. So this article speaking about folks that are actually experiencing this was eye-opening. And the Center for Transforming Lives is a nonprofit that helps women and children in poverty. They are, bringing this to light and have been bringing this to light for years, and are pointing out that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to address this housing crisis that folks that are not necessarily homeless currently, but could easily fall into homelessness with just one unexpected expense coming up.
And data shows that, based off the eviction lab in the U.S. Census Bureau, 125,000 kids are expected to be dealing with eviction annually in Texas. And what it also shows that the average household includes at least one child, and the most common age to experience an eviction is under the age of 18. And so in Tarrant specifically, you're looking at 15,000 children were reported to be without stable housing, according to the 2019 report from Center of Transforming Lives that you're talking about.
And that organization is actually just embarking right now on a new campus where they're going to be able to serve a great deal more folks. They currently are in a downtown location. They provide childcare. They provide job training services. The work that they do literally helps people lift themselves out of these circumstances, and it's not just like a shelter where it's taking care of you today. It is training and opportunity and resources in order to lift folks out of poverty and out of the situations that are causing these struggles to be occurring.
Yeah. I think the other part, I saw this in the Dallas Morning News about housing shortfalls. I imagine if Dallas doesn't do this, we for sure don't do this. I'd love to hear your take on this. Dallas is trying to solve its affordable housing problem. This is an article that was in their paper this week. It says, officials have repeatedly said they need 20,000 homes to close the gap. But an audit shows the true scope of the housing shortfall is unknown because the city's officials don't track how many homes Dallas has at any given time. They need to know those numbers to have a clear understanding of what has to be done to fully address the shortage, said City Auditor Mark Swan. Quote, someone in the city should be tracking it. Consider the amount of investment. There should be a place that can be relied on for consistent data so that when we're talking about the number of city housing units, the number doesn't vary depending on the source. He just kind of goes into how the data is not tracked. The audit showed that Dallas may have lost more than 5,000 single-family homes from 2016 to 2022. It has also calculated its own housing affordability index, determined that home buyers are increasingly being priced out in Dallas. I mean, it just goes on to continue to be like, we make all these marks for affordable housing, but then we don't actually track houses which are on the market and which are not for these cases.
Yeah, I know there's a huge database on the city of Fort Worth that they track a lot of things. So I would think that dashboard does include things like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I don't know for sure, but it would seem to be something that would be important to keep track of. I know that when it comes to the needs for folks that are working with folks experiencing homelessness, that they have a number of and the folks that work at Housing Solutions, the housing authority, the wait lists that they have of people needing affordable housing and the number of units that they need of permanent supportive housing based on the number of people experiencing homelessness that are going to need that supportive type housing. They're all keeping track of those things, and we have huge shortfalls there as well. And I know, not to take us back to Dallas, but there's another article in the Dallas Morning News about housing advocates' wage education campaign to fight NIMBYism in the Dallas Morning News. Dallas has a Dallas Housing Coalition that wants to fight myths fuel neighborhood opposition to housing projects to ensure that neighbors of all incomes can have affordable housing. And that leads us to the efforts that group is looking at, which is to try to get the Dallas City Council to put a $200 million chunk of funding in their upcoming bond dedicated to affordable housing, because they are going to have a $1.1 billion city bond proposal. And so they're asking for $200 million to be dedicated to affordable housing. So that would address that shortfall that you're talking about in the number of units. But right now, the recommended suggestion that the city manager is proposing is only $25 million. So that's a huge shortfall. But I don't even think the city of Fort Worth is proposing an affordable housing proposal in their bond. I'm hoping that that's something that they add, but this organization is doing a lot of work to try to address that NIMBYism factor, which is where you run into a problem with folks supporting the dispersing of affordable housing throughout the community so that you move away from concentrations of poverty. And back to that poverty simulation thing that I did, afterwards, when we were doing a wrap up, one of the questions was, did any of you in your family groups go to any of your neighbors and ask for help? And there was one woman from one family group that ended up getting evicted in the simulation that did come over to our family group and ask us for help. And I was a 21-year-old oldest child taking care of two 13-year-old twins and a 3-year-old toddler without a parent in the house. And I was like, no. We have no capacity to do anything but concentrate on ourselves, which was eye-opening to me, because basically when you have concentrations of poverty where everyone in that area are all struggling, there's not going to be the capacity to help your neighbor. But if you have mixed income housing and disperse it throughout the community, you have more opportunity to have folks able to help each other.
Yeah, and it feels, I don't know, maybe because I'm in the middle of it, growing my financial situation as a young professional, having a house now, paying things off, thinking long term. It seems like that crisis is also something that humans innately in consumerism and capitalism get to, even when they didn't have to. So now I'm just thinking man, that simulation was crazy for you were born into that situation. But even just, I think the amount of people who I think only think about their family and their existence goes beyond people in housing crisis. I mean, I think that's how you end up with everyone driving their kids to school. You have everyone, staying in their households and their big suburban blocks.
Driving to the back of their lot, into their garage, going into the back of their house, not being out in the neighborhood and communicating with their neighbors. Yeah,
and that's so I mean, but it doesn't take a take of how bad it is for our most needed areas. Let's go ahead and move into the environmental piece of all this. We talked about the educational impact of this. We talked about the urban sprawl. The suburban sprawl leads to schools being high growth in suburban areas, leaving our gaps in our Fort Worth school districts and urban districts across the state and the country. We also talked about the growth leading to outskirts areas in Texas where the suburban counties are growing more than the urban counties. You're even seeing that home values for the first time in a long time are growing at a faster rate in suburban areas than urban areas. We talked about how this also impacts housing and impacts rent. High rent fees makes high ownership cost. And so we just got out of the housing crisis stuff. Now let's talk about the environmental impacts of suburban sprawl and growth.
So there's 3 articles that touch on kind of environmental issues, and some of them are minor, small little things, but I think when you look at them across the entire Metroplex, they make sense to be paying attention to. So there was a Fort Worth Report article under their environmental section. Texas reports high pollution from gas-powered lawn equipment. Where does Tarrant rank? And the reason I brought this to our attention is because it reminded me of a bill that was introduced in the last legislative session, which would literally make it illegal for cities to restrict gas-powered lawn equipment and incentivize folks to use electric. to try to address this kind of at the local level. It was another, local control versus the state thinking that local is getting too big for their britches. And so they were literally passing laws that would make it so you could not try to tackle this issue of the gas-powered lawn equipment releasing 120 tons of particulate matter pollution in Tarrant County air each year, or the equivalent of emissions of 1.28 million cars, according to a new study. So these are all kind of the more people, more places, more sprawl, more growth, more lawn blowing equipment that's going to be in all of the places. And this particulate matter and pollution and unattainment air quality situation that we have in the Metroplex is going to continue to grow. And we have our state officials telling us, okay, yeah, you are trying to nip about the edges of that and fix that around the edges, but we're not going to let you. So that was the frustrating piece on that environmental question.
You also had that story around private landfills, and there's some, I guess, risk to contamination for some Fort Worth residents.
So there's a Fort Worth Star-Telegram article that is talking about Fort Worth's water risks contamination from a proposed private landfill, some residents say. Over on Silver Creek Road near Lake Worth is an area known for beautiful nature and tranquil environment. Bald eagles nest there. The aquifer is there. There's water, a lot of residents that have wells. And there is a proposal to have a Houston-based landfill is proposing to put a 6.6 acre landfill at 3411 Silver Creek Road. And the company is trying to reactivate a roughly 50-year-old permit originally used as a gravel pit on the site. And my understanding is that they would be accepting construction waste and other things. And so everybody's really concerned about the impact that this would have. So, when we grow and build and tear things down and need a place to put it, there has to be a place to put it. And nobody wants a landfill next to them. So no matter where you try to site a landfill, there's going to be concerns. And they are going to want to put them kind of out in further away from massive populations. And when you get out into those areas, the roads are not necessarily built. The roads and bridges are not necessarily built to handle the vehicles that bring waste to those kind of landfills. So this, again, is an issue of a need and where is it going to be? And nobody wants it next to them. And
it's America. It's America. It's an American problem. It's a classic America. We want to throw away stuff that we don't want, but then we don't want to see it, So it's like, we just want it to go away. We want to use paper plates because it's harder to use dishes during Thanksgiving. But then once you throw away all of our paper plates, we don't want to be around it. So it all makes for a difficult situation, especially with the sprawl. Let's go ahead and kind of dive into like 2 wins here, though, from like people trying to solve things. The first one, because we talked about homeless earlier, was Tarrant County Homeless Coalition did get $2.5 million grant assistance, and that was led by the Bezos Day One Family Fund, the man behind Amazon. It's the largest private gift the organization has received in history. The coalition is one of 38 nonprofits nationwide to receive the money to reduce family homelessness. Currently, that is at an all-time high in Tarrant County. So it's this one-time grant will be used for the agency to send and provide it to orgs that provide direct services to families.
Yeah. Tarrant County Homeless Coalition has a large number of groups that they support and that all work together, and it's a coalition. And so I think they do an excellent job of kind of knowing what each organization is doing, keeping track of data so that they're not overlapping in the services that they provide. They're the ones that were part of that poverty simulation that I participated in. So I think that this large gift that they've gotten is going to be put to excellent use to address some of the crisis that a number of families are experiencing, homelessness in our area. So I think that those funds are gravely needed, and I'm really glad that that organization is going to be shepherding those dollars here in Tarrant County.
Yeah, nearly 3,000 people are considered homeless in Tarrant County, and that's a 22% increase from 2020, according to an article in the Fort Worth Report earlier this September. So with all of this, we have an amazing team in Fort Worth trying to do more for affordable housing. but we also are now, Fort Worth has a new environmental department. Of the 25 largest cities in the U.S., Fort Worth stands alone as the only city without a long-term strategy to reduce its carbon footprint or address challenges posed by climate change.
So yes, our code department has been kind of over all of these things. So code and trash and environment has all been kind of one big department. And what this plan is putting forward is having an environmental department, standalone environmental department. So in the 2024 budget cycle, Fort Worth's environmental quality, solid waste, and consumer health staff have a department of their own, which is being led right now by an acting director, Cody Wittenberg, who was a former assistant code compliance director. Conversations about creating a new environmental services department go back to at least 2019, and I can tell you they go back further than that because we were talking about it in the early time that I was serving on council in 2014 and 2015, because the city of Fort Worth has very much been let's offer a carrot and encourage people to do things versus let's put regulations in place and require people to do things. And I don't think we've been getting the results that are necessary in order to stem environmental concerns and pollution by doing it that way. So my hope would be that this department could have a little bit more teeth in requiring things to happen and not just encouraging things to happen. So I think that the concern I see with the department is that it will be put in a position of trying to move forward with initiatives and ideas, and it will be trying to influence the actions and activities of other departments in the city, but it won't be the boss of them. Mm-hmm. So it's all about collaborating. And I don't necessarily think that all of the regulations should be in the one department. I think that it should be a collaboration, but there's got to be some teeth to it. I think that similar concerns that were raised about the equity and inclusion department, they analyze things that the other departments are doing and tell those other departments ways that they could do things more equitably and more inclusively, but they don't have the ability to require them to do that. And I think that the environmental department could find itself in a similar situation unless we have some requirements that people follow these things.
How does it hit the city planning kind of comprehensive plan, and how can we have it have influence to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of the suggestions are that when you're going to have a zoning change or any kind of development plan, that you have a piece where somebody looks at the impact on the environment. Yeah. So I think that that's where it could positively influence those things. I think there is a section of the comprehensive plan that talks about environment, but I'm not sure that it comes up on each decision piece. And I think the city of Fort Worth has been a long time, oil and gas has been industry that everybody is concerned about protecting and making sure goes forward. And, we went through the whole fracking and gas drilling and all of that. And I think that folks need to be willing to have the conversation about how do we continue to have this growth and require some stewardship of the environment in which we all depend on to make this a place that we all want to continue to live and a healthy place to live, because we've got high air pollution issues that cause asthma issues that are higher in our young population here than other places. We're non-attainment for air quality. And so all of these things are things that we need to be willing to look at and try to move ourselves in a better direction.
Well, as we move into wins and losses, I would like to wrap a bow on this big story, as we had 11 articles referenced for the big story. What is the bow that, after assessing this large topic that we cover pretty much every week, what is your overall take after going through these 11 articles?
My take is I think that there are more people willing to have the conversation beyond just growth is great, growth for growth's sake, growth pays for growth. I think there are more people recognizing that incremental steps need to occur when it comes to providing transportation, for protecting the environment, for having green space. I mean, all of these things are necessary to address and talk about. And I think more people are willing to have those conversations and do those incremental steps than have been in the past, and be willing to collaborate with other organizations that own a piece of it. I think we still fall into the issues and problems of nobody being the boss of everybody. And that holds us back. But I think that if we are willing to come together, have these collaborations and work on it together, and the more that it's in the public's eye and people are learning about these concerns and making decisions themselves based on all of the information and not just, I want this house, it's bigger. I'm not going to think about the fact that there's not these amenities nearby. I'm going to have to drive, all of this. The more we talk about these things, the more people can make informed decisions. And hopefully we can start to require development that is more thoughtful and not just the next big shiny thing getting built.
Yeah, I just think the overall lesson is, when the private sector gets to grow and decide how we grow, it just leads to focus on profits and minimal short-term gain, and
for a smaller group of people.
And it's real estate. I don't have any sympathy to real estate people at all, like zero sympathy, because at the end of the day, you're focusing on maximizing profit. I mean, you're not focused on maximizing humanity and people feeling like they have dignity to where they live. You're focusing on max profit. And I think for all of us, where we live in a capitalistic society, we just have to be thoughtful of, yes, when something is convenient, affordable, more bang for our buck, yes, innately this sounds like the best investment for us to make. But it's because for us to have that benefit, we're missing all the large consequences behind us, looking for the best bang for our buck, looking for the cheapest option. And we miss all the ramification it happens to us.
Those unintended consequences that we learn about after the fact. And then we are reluctant to
the
talk
thing is,
through
most
those
people,
things.
and most people I don't think are even aware that I think they just think this is how life is supposed to be. I don't think they're like, man, I really messed up on buying 35 minutes from my job. And there's this one road with a stop sign. I think they just live it and listen to Joe Rogan and then they call it a day. Like, I just think I don't think people are aware enough that it is that it doesn't have to be that way.
That there's a fix.
Yes.
And I think, to give a shout out to some people who are doing some great work on helping inform people in layman's language so that it's more understandable to them. There's an organization called Strong Towns that basically talks about these things, like small fixes. What are the things you struggle with every day, and what are some small fixes that could make it better? And it's not going to fix everything that Suburban Sprawl has done, over however many years we've been doing the Suburban Sprawl thing, but it will have impact, and it will help people understand what you just described, that why those unintended consequences are there, and that there are choices you can make and things that you could do to make it better.
So, let's go ahead and move into wins and losses. And obviously, we'll continue to hit this topic.
It seems to come up every time. I told EJ at the beginning of this, when we were back to talking about growth and development, I was like, is this something that I've brought, or is everybody going to think that Ann Zeta got on the podcast and now all we do is talk about growth and development? But you pointed out rightly that this is a hot topic in this area.
And it hits a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it hits a lot of things, and it's going to be interesting what the allergic response is going to be once people become conscious that, dang, I actually hate this and I don't want to live like this anymore. And that's probably 15, 20 years from now. But
if we wait 15 or 20 years, it's
to
just going to be a
about
bigger problem to fix.
Yeah.
So
So let's go ahead and move into wins and losses. This is where we highlight a win or loss for the week. Usually it's for Fort Worth, the county, or the state. And so we start with our losses so we can end on a win. I'll start my loss since your loss and wins are combined, like kind of have a
connection to each
connection.
other.
Guys, I need everyone to know, if you haven't, is that 2024 is going to be a massive year for democracy. More than half of the people on the planet live in countries that will hold a nationwide election. This is the first time this milestone has been reached. Close to 2 billion people in more than 70 countries will head to the polls. My loss is in 2024, an important election could lead to heavy consequences that are far greater than even the consequences of growth. And so my loss goes to, of course, Governor Abbott has endorsed Donald Trump and backed him to be the president of our country. Our family and my life at the holidays is not holding back from talking about politics. And I grow up in rural Texas. Most of my family is religious or conservative. And at the end of the day, my political thesis that I shared to them was very simple. I am not trying to make America better. I'm not trying to transform America. I just want to get back to America. That's step one. And that is when we used to have presidential candidates, and it was just Bush versus Gore. It was just Obama versus Mitt Romney. And it's not what it is today, where I think Donald Trump is bad for America. 2016 was there, and you thought it would be over now that we got past it. And it's very likely that if it's Biden-Trump, where there's serious consequences to a Trump election. And I think that, yes, you can be stressed out about wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, but when that man was our president, the war was in America. We had Charlottesville. We had George Floyd. You forget how peaceful it feels because it feels so far away, and we had a pandemic between that. But don't forget the chaos that we had domestically when we had a man in February call COVID the Kung Flu. So I'm not saying Biden's the man. All I'm saying is that I want to get back to feeling like there's good people who will make a good decision. That's my bar. And I want two people running for president in 2024 who fit that bill. And unfortunately, our loss is that Governor Abbott endorsed the man who got us in trouble last time.
I can't say anything to take away from that. I 100% agree. I think that is a huge loss. And I think we just spend time being like so surprised that people still support him.
But that goes back to what I said about, I don't think people are conscious enough that they don't think that their behaviors matter, that they can change their behaviors, their voice matters, and that they can advocate for what they want, and they can fight for a quality of living, and instead they just accept what is thrown at them, and then they do that with a smile, which there's also admirability to those people. I think my dad's one of those people. I think my mom's one of those people where you just take what the society and the world gives you, and you just take it and you be good at it, even if it means you got to spend an hour in a car to drive 10 minutes to go to work because there's one road. So I don't know. I feel like that's how people can vote for Trump because, it just sounds like what everyone else does in Texas or something. So go to your loss. I know your loss is more directly focused on local.
Fort Worth. Yep.
Fort Worth.
Yesterday was Small Business Saturday, and I, made an effort on my social media platforms to share with people the importance of supporting small business, and basically said, I'm not necessarily going out to shop on Small Business Saturday because I try to support small business all year round. And I think that's important. But I heard from a few folks that own small businesses in Fort Worth who felt like small business or experienced a Small Business Saturday that was not as robust as they would hope. And I could see how that could be completely disappointing, because that was an opportunity for us to stand up and show our small businesses that we support them. So yesterday, Small Business Saturday, not necessarily resulting in as much support from the community as some of our small businesses had hoped. If you're looking for small businesses to support, there are a multitude of people that are sharing opportunities for businesses locally in Fort Worth that you should step up and share. I know that when I brought this up earlier, EJ made a comment about how nobody's shopping in person. And I said, I didn't realize what I was missing in that shopping in person thing until I went and did it a couple of times. And the exchange that you have with people in your community who are working hard is 1,000 times worth getting out in the community and doing that in-person shopping. It's so much more fulfilling than a box showing up on your front porch that you're going to have to figure out where that box goes after you take the item out of it. Getting back to that recycling question.
So this transfers, the win is...
So, yeah, we are now ready to talk about wins so I'll go with my win first because it's basically the same. You still have the opportunity to support the small businesses that are in Fort Worth, and you can step up and do that all year round. My example is always, if you want coffee or tea in this city, there is no reason to go to a chain that is supported by the foundation of that chain across the whole entire country. There are local people here delivering product that is absolutely amazing and fantastic. And you might not be able to go sit in a line at a drive-through to get that product or order it on an app, but the fulfillment of supporting that small business. And last week we talked about entrepreneurship in Fort Worth and all the people that are busting their ass to build and grow entrepreneur and have their dream in this city. And all of that goes away if we don't get off our butts and get out there and buy things from these people and support these people in the endeavors that they are doing in our city. So my win is that I know there's just a ton of people. And there was a thread yesterday that people were sharing on their social media about name somebody that you think is doing something great in our community and describe in just a sentence or two what it is that they're doing. And I saw that get shared several times. And, every time I see social media being used for good instead of complaining and bitching and evil, I'm happy. So I went ahead and shared that yesterday and got to see a lot of folks getting shout outs that are doing great work. And so I encourage you to go and not just sit on your phone at home like I did yesterday, but get out and support the folks that are doing this small business thing in our city, which is making the places that are the places that people want to live, work, and play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my win is kind of the whole synopsis of this was around development. There's a win here around the quote. It's the Fort Worth Star-Telegram story. Kamal Morgan, November 21st. Fort Worth wanted more contracts with minority women-owned businesses. How have we done? There's still a lot of work to do here, but I want to just acknowledge that there was some good data here. So what it shows here, the report showed an upward trend of contracts awarded by the city to minority and women-owned businesses from the 2018-2019 fiscal year to the 2022-2023 fiscal year. In a 4-year span from 2018 to 2022, contracts to African-American-owned businesses went from 1% to 5.9%. Contracts Hispanic-owned businesses went from 6.7% to 8.9%. And contracts of business owned by white women went from 1% to 3.7%. The interesting part of this is that contracts to black-owned businesses dip to 1.2% of total awards in fiscal year 2022-2023, while contracts in Hispanic and women-owned business continued to grow to 9.8% and 3.84% respectively. So the loss within the win is that there is just, from a financial value, there was a dip in the overall financial gains from the minority black-owned construction business contract workers, much more than the Hispanic and white, which I don't know who we could talk to about this whole story and can give us the in and outs of maybe what they think that could be, but it'd be great to talk to someone in the business equity division department who did all this work to see. That's a big difference.
Yeah, I think that
impact.
part of that is, this is just me guessing, but I know that the Hispanic Chamber is rocking it, and they are almost all women. I think they've got like one man on their staff, and all the rest of them are women. So there are some Hispanic women in this community that are just doing a phenomenal job. And this article talks about Jeff Postel, who is the founder of Post L Group, a Black-owned construction management company. And I know him, and he headed up a combination mixer during Entrepreneurship Week that I attended in my black tie gown because I had another event right after. That was a mixer for talking about doing infill development in the core of the city. And it was co-hosted by the Black Chamber and the Hispanic Chamber. And so I think there are efforts going on to address that very thing. And Jeff is leading that for sure.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I finally met Annette Landeros at the Fort Worth Hispanic Chamber. I finally met her at your event. That was the first time I met her.
I was
She
just
won
the MC
instigator
of that event. You can't. I'm not. That is not my event.
Okay, my bad.
The entrepreneurial luncheon, the state
You're
of
the
entrepreneurship.
MC. She won an award and you emceed. But
Yes, and she
won
won the Instigator Award, which I think is a fantastically named award, and it fits what they're doing at the Hispanic Chamber for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, that is the pod this week. We went over an hour, almost an hour 20. And hopefully you guys enjoy the extra dosage because you won't have us for like 4 to 6 weeks.
I'm going out of town next weekend to visit my kids and my mom, and you're going on a big old trip.
Yep. So it's going to be interesting. I might try to figure out a conversation for this upcoming week when Anna's gone. I might be tapping into some of our guest pod peeps. But at the end of the day, if you got this far, you are someone who's doing some great things. You are being conscious of how you look at your reality, and you're giving us a chance to, and you're investing in yourself, and you're investing in us, and considering us as good judgment as you figure out your perspective and reality on how to look at the world. I want you to know to not just listen to me and Ann. I want you to find other things, other YouTubers, other podcasts, people who didn't think differently to us. Because I'm learning that even if you go find alt media, it's the diversity of, getting someone, that's different, who's also providing a perspective, So I'm glad that we're part of it, but I also want to challenge you to make sure we're not your only piece. And we have no sponsors. Nobody gives us money to do this. This is all things we would do without recording on Sundays. I think me and Ann would read the same exact way and do this all the time. And
torture our spouses with this information instead of all of you.
Yeah. So we now feel like this is a good cadence because now we get to share it with you guys. And so all we ask is that you comment, like, share, tell other people because this is honest civic journalism, citizen journalism that I think is a new era of media that people have seen through podcasts. So bless up, and we'll see you possibly December 3rd week. For myself, you won't be here. I might figure something out. But then December 10th,
I'll be back.
We'll be back.
Yep.
We'll do something there. We possibly might have a guest. And then 2, and I don't even think you know that. And then 2, we're going to try to do one right before I leave for a month. So then you will have one for December 15th.
Right.
And then
we'll be on a break until you get back.
Until I get back.
Because I am not able to carry this off without EJ. EJ does all the technical stuff, all the things. So he can get a guest and fill in. I can be easily replaced, but EJ is impossible to replace and have this pod go on without him.
So we'll keep you guys updated on what we do, and but we also have a big excitement just to get stronger for next year as well. Just how to get it's an election year, so it's just going to be even more exciting, more guests wanting to jump on to talk to our constituents, which is you guys. So it's going to be a fun 2024.